Chapelhay, the Raids. On September the 3rd, 1939, people all over the country gathered around the wireless to listen to a speech by Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain. As Big Ben struck the hour, Britain was at war with Germany. In his book, A Teenage View of Wartime Weymouth, Des Fry recalls the German air raids. He writes, "An almighty blast of air rocked the house, blowing smoke and flames from the coal fire out into the room. This was followed almost immediately by what sounded like a great clap of thunder. There had been no sirens, no sound of aircraft. It came completely out of the blue, or perhaps I should say, out of the night. This later proved to be a parachute sea mine, dropped by a lone plane and allowed to drift over the bay. Instead of splashing down in the entrance to the harbour to await some unsuspecting ship, it came to rest on top of Chapelhay, blowing up on impact. The location of the explosion was in the gardens on the north side of Franchise Street, about halfway down, and east of Love Lane. Landing where it did and exploding on the surface, it was said at the time to have totally destroyed or made uninhabitable some 400 homes.
I was buried in Franchise Street in a lady's garden. There was an underground shelter, 17 steps down going down, and on this particular occasion a bomb dropped in St Leonard's Road, and all the debris come up over the house and filled in where the steps was. And it was very, very lucky for us all that one lady's husband was working for the fire station, and he was on what they call a runner. He was taking little notes around on a bicycle, and it was only owing to him that he knew where his wife was and told them where to dig to get her out. Well, us kiddies in there, all the hurricane lamps blew out, and the women were screaming, we were all crying, and it was terrible, terrible feeling. And it was only owing to that man that really saved us. And that's the nearest I think I ever come to being snuffed out.
One of the most profound stories that I uncovered in my research for this film was of Kenneth Polden, who was a 10-year-old boy who lived in Chapelhay. And one night, during the most terrible bombing that Chapelhay suffered, he was sent to bed by his mum as normal. And then the bomb dropped, and the following morning, when they sadly pulled his body from the wreckage, his hands were still clasped in prayer, having asked God to save his family from the bombs. And yeah, so that was terrible.
I know we had shelters at home, and we had, later on, we had a table, a metal table, and under the metal table we used to put sort of bedding or blankets, so it was soft to go under the table.
I mean, after an air raid, we used to run out the road and see who was left and who was gone, what houses was gone, and looking for shrapnel off of different planes that come down, and you know, it was all exciting stuff. And we had dens, made dens over in the bombed houses, and I could tell one or two stories about the dens. And we used to have brick fights across the road between like a bedroom window one side of the road, and they used to throw bricks at one another, which health and safety, you wouldn't believe what we done. We used to climb up in the roofs of the houses, take chances of going through the ceiling, and we used to have feats given us by the bigger boys, who was the main ones, and we had to join the gang. You had to do these feats to be in the gang, and they used to have us like running down. In those years, a kitchen was called a scullery. And they used to make us, it was a lean-to off the main house. They used to make us run down the slates of the scullery roof and jump into a pivot bush and come out bleeding up to your neck, you know, with the brambles and all that you jump into, and you think you'd just come back from war. You'd never believe it.
Chapelhay was to be hit time and again throughout the war, but this raid was by far the worst. Whereas bombs dropped in earlier raids had destroyed one or two houses, parachute mines were capable of razing whole streets. Of the 12 killed, all but one were residents of Franchise Street. 879 houses suffered damage, 77 of which were totally destroyed. Holy Trinity School was hit, and the children were temporarily housed in the old technical school in Commercial Road, now the Arts Centre.
I remember during the rationing, I remember the butter. My mother, of course, there was a family of us, and she used to go, and I think we were allowed an ounce of butter. And so my mother used to get all the ounces cut separately, and so we all used to have our ounce of butter. And I had one brother who used to spread the whole lot in one go and eat it. And I used to try to make my ounce of butter last. And I used to put patterns on it, so I would make sure that no one had touched my bit of butter. But yes, I remember that, butter. And my father never liked margarine, so he wasn't very happy because, but I remember once he spread a piece of bread and butter and he cut it in half. And I remember looking at it and I said, "Oh, can I have that, Dad?" And he said, "Oh, blooming kids," he said. And he passed it on to me and he gave me his half a piece of bread and butter. It was lovely.
When you sat down to table, we used to have our own little pots of different stuff. But when your pot was empty, that was due finished for the week. So you had like a little paste pot filled, say, with sugar. And if you had that on porridge in the mornings, and directly that sugar was, you didn't get no more. That was gone.
We used to go and chat up the Americans there. I think they were Americans. And sometimes they would give me eggs. And so I would take home eggs, And I remember there were some barges on the sands, on the beach in Weymouth. They were American ships there. And I used to go down and I got friendly with one of the captains of the ship, and I used to go and see him. One day he gave me a tin of tomatoes to take home to my mother, so I hid it under my coat. He said, "Don't let anyone see it." And I remember hiding it under my coat and catching the bus home to my mother in Norfolk Road and giving her a big tin of tomatoes.
Reverend Cecil Plaxton, vicar of Holy Trinity Church, worked hard to keep people's spirits up. In the November 1940 edition of the Parish Magazine, he wrote this stirring letter to the inhabitants of Chapelhay. "If the enemy imagines that he has done himself any good by hurting our parish, he has made a big mistake. We are gritting our teeth, and with a smile on our faces, we are feeling more determined than ever to stick it out. Let us turn to God more and more and more for our help and strength. Let us commit ourselves and our loved ones to His keeping, knowing that underneath are the everlasting arms." A year later, in May 1941, Chapelhay suffered 2 devastating raids in as many days, killing 7, including a 4-year-old boy. Despite this tragedy, morale remained high. When the staff of the Franchise Street Co-op store arrived one morning to find the shop windows blown in and groceries strewn everywhere, they were back in business within the hour. A pub landlord whose windows suffered the same fate simply swept up the glass and carried on business with his bars open to the street.
Well, there was so much damage, it was all like derelict, really, all boarded up. And there was one butcher shop in Franchise Street. When the landmine dropped on a Sunday, it scattered a half a mile radius. And only one shop left that was a butcher shop, which was only sort of half left, put it that way. But the butcher man himself wasn't going to give up. He would not give up. He had tins of sheeting all round, keeping it together, and sawdust on the floor. And he kept that going all the war years. He was amazing. Yeah, there's only one left.
Everybody who we've spoken to for this documentary has been incredibly proud of how well everyone adjusted to what was the most turbulent time of the past century. And actually, you talk to them and you wouldn't know anything happened. To us looking back, it's horrendous, but of course it was just something that they had to deal with when it came up. And you hear a lot of people who remember that period talking of the Blitz spirit and keeping calm and carrying on. The difficult thing about trying to elicit stories about this period is it's so inconsequential in the minds of people that lived through it, because to them it was just like another day. And so we think of heroes as being just on the battlefield, but it takes a particular kind of heroism to face that, the prospect of bombing every night, and just to try and carry on as if nothing was going on.